I thought we were already recording an intro.
Maybe this is.
It's a rather long intro.
Well, they don't have to know that.
Well, they do now.
Well, you gave it away.
We're the Grumpy Dungeon Masters. So,
Yeah.
if you haven't listened to us at all, we occasionally will talk to Craig, which is basically just the recording device. We talk to him like he's a person, and we are designing a character for him.
Okay.
Well, you need to we need to do
we're-
intros.
You know I don't fucking do intros.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jay, and tonight we have our first guest ever, Mr. Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Hardy.
And Craig is with us as always, recording, doing what he does. So we were talking about it earlier. Basically, with Craig, we are slowly building him his own character that we're going to release at some point. So what we have determined is, how familiar are you with D&D 5e? First off, pretty familiar.
I love 5e.
Okay, good.
It is like that throwback to second edition. Very streamlined, but it's a lot of fun. I'm digging 5e.
Same. So basically, we've determined that Craig is a full orc. He is a bard, possibly barbarian, and that what was the background we were using for him?
Sage. He's
Sage
a sage
background.
Okay.
So he has all the scripting tools because he's our scribe.
All right. Nice.
So you have to add one thing to his story, whether it could be a stat or it could be an item maybe that he has, something just to help flesh out his character more.
Well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to add backstory because that's much more important for me.
Okay.
And Craig's brother Trevor. It's definitely it's not spelled Trevor.
It's Trevor, TRE''VOR.
Yeah. And Trevor is Craig's younger brother who tries so hard to be the ultimate orc. He is the orkiest orc that ever orked.
Yeah, I mean, being that Craig is a bard, he's sort of the runt of the litter. So it makes sense that you have the bigger brother, who sort of looks after him.
Right. So, there we go. Craig and the sibling rivalry with Trevor.
And now we have created an antagonist for Craig.
Right, and you can thank Chris Lynch for that because that was a character that he played in a short-lived 5e game that I ran where everybody played half orcs or orcs.
Nice.
Fantastic.
So, Mr. Kevin, we brought you on as a guest, so I guess if you could, for the audience who doesn't know who you are, could you describe a little bit about yourself and what you are known for to the most people, maybe specifically the LARP that you run?
So yes, I run with my wife Casey. We run Shadowmoor LARP, which is a live-action role-playing game based out of Kings Mountain, South Carolina. Shadowmoor is a mid fantasy. It's not really high fantasy, not really low fantasy. It's somewhere in between. It's a gritty frontier town where might makes right. There's no overall authority that provides any sort of law and order. Though they have to deal with all of the existing civilizations in the world that's around this small town of Shadowmoor and its group of heroes who are a bunch of ne'er-do-wells.
We are totally ne'er-do-wells.
Yeah, blackguards and ne'er-do-wells. But yeah, I've been Casey and I have run Shadowmoor now for technically this would have been 6 years if the plague hadn't happened.
Counts, sort of.
Right, it kind of counts. But Shadowmoor's been around since it's 22 years old now. So Shadowmoor's
97, I think.
97, yeah. well, in well, actually, this summer it would have turned 23 then.
Because I'm pretty sure I started in '97, way
Yeah,
back when.
you started the event before I did.
Yep.
Um,
God, we're old.
yeah, and so like it's been around for a long time, and we've gone through ups and downs, been through several owners, and it's just kind of been passed off from uh,
And
the
yeah, and
the
so
original
many
creator. Yeah,
so many
You're-
campaign just sort of rewrites and story changes, and the history's changed, and uh, yeah, it's definitely a different game than it used to be.
well, and it's also it evolved with the times. As
Hmm.
like technology's improved, we've been able to keep better, uh, keep better records as to what's happened and what's going to happen, and so you start building in not only your short term, because the Southeast Boffer LARPs have a history of having a volunteer plot staff, which both of you are on this year, even though this year is kind of shot. Um,
Yeah, but we've been
which
doing it on and off for, I mean,
Right, yeah.
years at this point, the staff aspect of it.
So the volunteer staff rotates on a yearly basis, and so they they are in charge of the main content of the story that happens over the course of the entire year. So it's not a one shot story for every event that we meet, but it's a continuing thing. And then
It's a campaign, like
right, it's a whole campaign. Um, but then of course we have a level of staff above that which is still volunteer, but they kind of stay on longer, and they're in charge of helping to manage longer overarching stories that may last 5, 6 years and so on. So there's multiple levels of what's going to be going on at any one time, which is exciting and frustrating and infuriating and crazy.
Yep, and we love every minute of it, even when we don't love every minute of it.
Exactly. It's something about it. You just sinks its teeth into you and doesn't let go.
So on D&D, like I started with second edition. What edition did you start? Was it second also or first?
I caught the tail end of first. Um, I do remember I'd bought my first edition book was used actually when I actually started playing.
Mhm.
But like when I was in high school, that's when second edition came out. So we immediately latched onto that. So that's really
Technically, I started with Red Box, but immediately bought
right.
into second ed AD&D, which had just come out at that
Right.
time.
So, I mean, very similar to that. My parents, when I was very young, watched the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, and begged and begged and begged to get some Dungeons and Dragons for Christmas one year, and I got the red box set, but I was way too young to understand how to actually play a game like that. And so it wasn't until high school that uh, I understood enough to really grasp the concept of role playing and the mechanics, and sat down and read most of the rule book. So yeah, second edition was really the first edition that I played.
Wait, you're supposed to read the rule book?
Kind of, that's what I'm told, but eh,
Nah.
I kind of flip and find a page and like, here's a thing.
Oh, that looks neat. Let's try this.
Mm,
Yeah, that sounds like me. That's the rules they're guidelines.
right, yeah. And that's one of the most important things that I've learned as I've gotten older is don't let the rules get in the way of your fun. Um, because
True.
sometimes if you're looking for how a particular rule, especially if it's very um, minute and detailed, how it's going to affect a certain situation, and you end up spending an hour and a half trying to find it in the rule book, discuss it, and figure out how it applies, that's an hour and a half that you've missed out on playing
Well,
because
yeah,
you've been
we've.
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because you've been arguing about that rule or going back and forth, and so you've missed out on the story and the camaraderie. That's the biggest
It
part of that table
it
is
also breaks that flow state. Like
yeah,
when everybody's in the game, in character, and you have to spend 10 minutes looking up a rule that it might change things, it might matter, but it's just it screws with everybody's tempo.
right. And rather than just allowing your GM, storyteller, whoever, whatever you want to call the one who's in charge of that story to keep going, you just break your tempo, break your flow. That's rough.
So my table, we've kind of gotten used to that, and we actually deal with it really well overall because everybody understands that we don't all know all the rules all the time. So what we'll do is we will spend if it's a rule and we think we know where it is, we'll go look it up. If we are unable to find it within about 2 minutes tops, at that point, I, as the DM or whoever is DM, just makes a ruling that stands for that situation right then and there. Uh, if later on we come back and find the rule, we're not going to retcon anything, but we use the rules for consistency. Because you don't want to rule one way and then rule another way for somebody else, because that could, just kind of screws people over. But it's more important to keep that game moving and keep the game going.
That's very true. I can't agree more.
That's why I like to have that. Usually, whenever I have a table or I run a game, I usually have one person there that knows all the rules, and we kind of discuss like what rules lawyers are in the past. But this really isn't like a rules lawyer. Just he's a guy that has the encyclopedic knowledge of all the rules. So
I just call that Google.
Yeah, that's usually how I try to find it too.
Yeah, so often, like I'm playing in a couple of Roll20 games right now, and it always boggles me when somebody will pipe up and go like, Kevin, well, what does such and such a rule say? And I just have to grumble under my breath as I open up a new tab and type in, magic items 5e, sort of life stealing, and then open that up. It's like, you could have done this.
See,
this is not that hard.
That's when you go in the Facebook chat or even the Roll20 chat and you type in www.google.com and just let them go figure it out.
Well, it's like the Sage Advice. That guy Jerry Crawford, who actually made all the rules changes. You just got to go to his little blog. The answer's probably in there if you haven't looked. And
except
it's still
I'm
up
going
to
to disagree with it.
It's still up to the DM to decide whether or not to actually go with it or not.
Oh yeah,
yeah. We talked about that guy a couple times on here, and I like the guy, but I always hate the way he words anything and everything he discusses, because I almost always genuinely disagree with it. He's not always wrong. It's just his wording is so, I don't know, it's hard to follow and leaves things open a lot of the time.
And of course, there are just some people you're not going to like.
Also true.
That's just going to happen. All right.
So what games are you playing in, and what games are you currently running?
So right now, playing in 2 5e games, both of which are weirdly are both pirate games.
Are they? Is it both Salt Marsh, or one Salt Marsh and one something else?
One Salt Marsh and one's a homebrew, where we're playing kind of a low magic game. It's been a lot of fun. The GM's done a really good job of helping to integrate all of the backstories of the PCs into this overarching. We're searching for this one pirate legend who was cursed because of whatever he did, and like everybody's got their different reasons for going after him. That's really fun. And of course we're doing Salt Marshes. Salt Marsh is a separate game that I'm playing in, and that's just that brings me back because that was one of the first adventures that I ever DM'd was Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. I ran it as a second edition game. Of course, the module when I had it was a used copy that I found, and of course that's a first edition AD&D
Yeah,
mod.
the oddly enough, the rules between first and second barely changed.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing was Thaco.
Yeah, well, Thaco was a first edition thing as well. Like that didn't really change
No,
much.
well, Thaco as a concept really came about in second edition. In first edition, you had that huge table that had everybody's. It was essentially Thaco, but they didn't call it Thaco.
Okay.
But there's this huge table that you would roll, and you'd have to cross-reference your dice roll with any bonuses that you might have had.
Oh yeah, I'm looking
Versus
at it
their
right now.
AC, and then like you would take both fingers and meet them because
Yeah.
of
Okay. So yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and no, it literally they have a table, but it's literally just Thaco.
it is. It just wasn't called Thaco.
Yeah. They didn't. Yeah, they didn't have the 2-hit armor class 0 at that point, but it's literally the sliding scale of +10 to -10.
Yeah. But you know, it was so easy to convert over from first to second.
Thanks, Google.
Yeah. So that's a lot of fun. Let's see. We just finished my Wednesday night game. We finished running the Alien RPG.
Oh,
We
yeah.
heard.
I was talking to Dan with that. Dan about that yesterday.
That was a very stressful game. It has a cool mechanic, stress that you gain stress as you.
Is it a homebrew system or is it the actual Aliens one? Because I wasn't aware there was an Aliens game until like 6 months ago.
It's published. I don't know. So it's won a couple of awards. It's not too. It's pretty nice. It's supported by Roll20, so that's been fun. Easy to. I love the fact that Roll20 integrates so many different types of character sheets.
I've seen Call of Cthulhu on there. I'm waiting.
And getting ready to start that game. We just finished that game. My Wednesday night game. Our entire purpose there is to try new systems and play new games. So we've played John Carter of Mars. We played Conan. Both of those use the
Sold. I'm in.
The 2D20 system, which is really easy and really fun. I like it a lot. That's where I first played Monster of the Week. And then we just finished the Alien game. And next, Chris is going to run some Carbon 2185, which is a cyberpunk game which uses 5e rules. And it's very nice. So what I've seen so far and what I've delved into has been very refreshing, and I like it a lot. Of course, I like cyberpunk stuff.
I'm a huge fan of cyberpunk, but I don't like learning new systems. So being able to play in 5e with it,
yeah,
I'm in.
And so what they've done, instead of going from 1 to 20, the system only goes 1 to 10.
Okay.
But it takes longer for you to, according to like their experience points chart, it takes you longer to go to level up. So you'd have to earn the equivalent of, let's say, of 20 levels of experience to hit level 10. But it also compresses the you don't have the power swing, the power surge that you would have with those extra 10 levels of proficiency bonuses and stuff like that to spread everything out. And they replaced there's no magic, of course. It's because it's not Shadowrun, it's actual true cyberpunk.
Right.
But they've included cyber augmentations, which are cool. And they've got a nice little mechanic with a toxic bleed. Basically, the cybernetics that you can get have power cells in them, but they leak toxic waste into your system. So the more power you need to power the more powerful cyber gear, the more toxic bleed you get that poisons your blood. And so that limits the amount of cyberware you can get.
Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah, straight up. And then they have special abilities for hackers and docs. And just to make healing a thing, they just use nanobots. So,
I mean, for future tech, that's the easiest way to do it.
Right. Yeah. Basically, you've got a doc class, a healer class that has a cybernetic enhancement that injects nanobots into wounds of other people to heal them. And it's easy. It's right there. It's great. I like the system. I like they even have a influence system built in as well. About because you can have either street influence or corporate influence, and the more stuff you do, you gain in those, and that opens up like being able to buy new cybernetics of different levels of augmentation, or getting better jobs, or being able to sell stuff that you've scavenged if that's what you're into. So you can buy and sell stuff easier.
Yeah,
based on your
I'll
influence.
definitely be looking at that one. So for anyone listening to the podcast, expect me to run that at some point, and then I'll talk to Chris about it, and he can just nod and shake his head a lot.
Yeah, and then and then the game that I'm running right now is Monster of the Week, which is based on Powered by the Apocalypse system.
And which I am not familiar with.
Oh, I love it! I love it so much. So it's a very narrative focused system, very rules light. So it's very much.
I think me and you talked about it before. Yeah, because I don't really do narrative systems. I tried it with the Dresden Files, and it just never clicked with me.
I personally found the Dresden system a little clunky, and a little hard to manage. Monster of the Week is sweet. I really dig it. But again, it's very narrative driven, and it's so you can run anything from Supernatural and X-Files, very heavy, to very lighthearted, and you could do like a Scooby-Doo sort of feel to it, depending on what the storyteller wants to do and what the players want to do and how you want to combine that. So you have a lot of freedom there.
Yeah,
that's what I'm running right now.
There's the plethora of systems out there. Like, if you're like just starting to like be a DM or get into tabletop, and you just like try like Dungeons and Dragons, which is the most popular one, you may not like it, and then you have the alternatives like Pathfinder or the older 3.5 edition, or even older and go second. I skipped fourth on purpose, and I always gone out to a lot of like flea markets and in places like that, and just go through all their books and try to find what old RPG systems I could find that are just so unique. And I found a whole bunch. None that have a name that would even register. Like most of the times, I Google these weird RPG systems and weird RPG books that I find on Google, and they don't appear at all. So they're like relics lost to time almost. But there are so many systems out there that you got to find out which one works the best for you, and double down on that one. Or if you can play multiple ones, just go crazy and play them all.
Like I absolutely love Dungeons and Dragons as a gaming system and whatnot, but it's also partly because I'm old and cranky and just don't want to invest time into learning all these new systems.
That is spot on right there, and that's one reason. And I'm going to plug it again. The whole Powered by the Apocalypse system is based off of a set of attributes or some other mechanic. Plus, you roll 2d6. And based on that is how things work. And they have things as from or a fantasy game called Dungeon World. You also have a game where you basically make a thieves guild, and you are attempting to take over the city from other thieves guild. Like you start out as a small gang, and it's called Blades in the Dark. That's a pretty cool game.
That sounds neat.
Yeah, and they've got a superhero system called City of Mists, and it's a like superhero noir sort of feel to it. We're going to try that pretty soon as well. And so, if you learn that one system, the overall thing, all of these other settings are simply minor variations on that one system.
So I know, Kevin, that you're familiar with GURPS. You have to be. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So that is honestly what this sounds like. So Chris, GURPS was GURPS, which literally stood for Generic Universal Role Playing System. It was made by Steve Jackson, who is the guy who made Munchkin. And there was a generic system. It was set in a fantasy setting. And it was literally just that. It was generic. It was easy to learn. It was just a bunch of D6s. Didn't have any D20s or anything weird to it. And he expanded upon it. Every book that he'd put out would be some weird new setting. Superheroes, science fiction. You get your cyberpunk thrown in there. Conan-esque settings. Like it. I don't know
anything
how many.
and everything. Yeah. I remember I would just buy the setting books just for the flavor to set something else in.
I still have a few of those books floating around. One of them was, I think it's called Alternate Worlds, and it was a setting that was nothing about. It was literally every setting in one, because it was portals. It was sliders that could go anywhere in the multiverse. Kind of like Hoptown, actually. Now that I think about it, which is my own campaign setting for D&D.
So I guess we've talked a lot about systems. What advice could you give to a DM with all these different types of systems that that they're wanting to try out or looking for one?
I would always say don't limit yourself to one thing. Find a feel that a feel that fits your play style, and find a system for that, because as streamlined and fun as 5th edition is, you could have something with much more mechanical involvement, such as Pathfinder or even 3.5. And then there's a whole range of, do you want a more narrative based system where it's more rules light and you get to have more storytelling, or do you want it to be more tactical and more mechanic based? And guess what? None of those are wrong. It depends on what you want to do, but you've got to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah, even Dungeons and Dragons has changed in that aspect over the years. Like first and second editions definitely had rules, but they left a lot up to DM discretion with stuff. And there were a lot of things that were very just sort of narrative based. Third edition is when they really started to sort of streamline things. Fourth edition was literally just a board game or video game in role play format, and fifth edition sort of hits that sweet spot between them, I think. Like it's definitely got lots of rules, but it's not so overwhelming. My only complaint is that when it comes to spells, it sort of just limits what you can do heavily, which I preferred second and third edition, where Fireball is Fireball, but Wish didn't really have limitations on it. Whereas in fifth ed, it's you can do whatever you want with it, but you risk never being able to cast it again.
And part of that too is like there were excesses, especially with third edition and 3.5. You had so many source books, source
Yep.
material, and third-party stuff.
And oh my God, all the number crunching.
even some official source books that were like, a year or so after they would come out, even not even that much. A lot of GMs were like, "No, we're not. You can't play this prestige class. That is just nope, 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 nope. That's just too much."
What do you mean I can't play a Psy Master or some shit like that? Yeah, there were a lot of books in third edition. So
and second edition, especially like Forgotten Realms stuff, ended up with a lot of setting material.
Mm-hmm.
So like I know that there were box sets and source books about one certain region of Forgotten Realms, or mini continent of the Forgotten Realms, and so you get a whole source book or a whole box set just for that. Third edition, you ended up with mechanic stuff.
Yes. So yeah, and that's actually a beautiful way to view it. So second edition, I still have a lot of my second and third edition stuff. Second edition, one of my favorite things I ever got was the box set for Myth Draenor or Menzoberranzan. These were not, they weren't rules. They were just source material. And then third edition, you would get the book for the Far East or whatever it was called. I can't recall the name of the book off the top of my head. And it would have a lot of source material in it, but literally the first half of the book is here's your prestige classes and your new spells. And
Yep.
So that's why I like the fourth edition books a lot, because they had like, here are all the mechanic books. Here's volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3, and here's all the setting books. But I think they swapped about like halfway through its run and basically said, okay, here's the Feywild book. Has all the Feywild settings and all the new classes and all the everything just for the Feywilds. And they kept churning those out every 3 months, and it just got to be way too much.
So I actually have sitting right next to me my favorite D&D book of all time. It was 3.5, Lords of Darkness. Are you familiar with that one, Kevin?
Yeah, that's a good one.
So the Lords of Darkness, yeah, go ahead.
Right up there with the Book of Vile Darkness. That's another fun one.
Book of Vile Darkness was full of magic items and spells and everything. Mind you, it is a great book. But the Lords of Darkness, there's a couple of prestige classes in here, but literally 98% of this book is nothing more than telling you about these evil organizations. I use this so heavily for my own campaign building. Like, it's a wonderful book.
And that ultimately is like why I try to collect some older RPG books, just so that I can see like what mechanics they use, what was their ideas and thought processes to the system they designed, and then again, what was their world? How did their dwarves act? Were they also down in digging holes? Yep, just like everybody else. Doesn't change. It doesn't change actually, like except for Shadowmoor. This is like the only place that dwarves have some kind of other culture than just, hey, we're in a mountain.
We dig holes. We're dwarves. We have beards. That's
pretty. Yeah.
A buddy of mine was. I probably shouldn't even talk about this, but I'm going to anyway. And if I don't like it, I'll just cut it out of the podcast. So one of the guys I was playing D&D with, is joking about his next character that he makes is going to be just like from Boondocks, Uncle Ruckus. So are you guys familiar with the character?
Yeah.
I am not.
Okay, Uncle Ruckus is a black guy who hates black people. Like, he's literally your Uncle Tom. And the idea is for my buddy, he wants to play a dwarf that hates dwarves. So he's just going to shave his beard and pretend to not be a dwarf most of the time.
All right.
Yep.
So, I guess we talked about D&D quite a bit. Let's steer it kind of like to Shadowmoor, and like you took over the game a couple years ago.
Wait, this is a LARP. This is a LARP podcast. When did this?
No. You took over the game a couple years ago, and we definitely felt that as players, definitely felt a tonal shift in the storytelling as you guys try to like let the previous stories kind of like conclude and start creating your own new stories. when you're doing your like game design and story creation, what is your process for that? Is it just grab a couple drinks, couple good buddies, sit on the porch, and just talk for 6 hours and hope you remember everything in the morning, or do you have
That's my
a
process.
different process for things?
Well, normally I come to those sort of board meetings, um, with at least an idea or two in my pocket, and it could simply be an idea for a storyline, or like how we're going to uh, take a culture, like take them in a different direction, or to highlight a detail or something like that. So you, but part of that creative process is definitely uh, the brainstorming session with other people, uh, because getting the input of especially people you trust, especially because a LARP like that, you're dealing with, it's not your game world that you're sitting down at your table with six of your friends, and it's very insular
It's
because you only have
paying customers, and
it's
it could
paying
be
customers.
a couple hundred of them. So
Yeah, as opposed to six people that you're entertaining, you're trying to entertain 150 or 200. Uh, there's a there, there's a different thought process, because you know it's much easier to know those six people at the table and be able to play into their strengths, or play against their weaknesses, play into their interests, than it is 150, 200 people. Uh, so trying to broaden that whole process is very important. Um, one of the ways I like to do that, you go back to the old saying of think globally but act locally. So you think of the big picture, but you've got to narrow it down to how it affects that whatever the PCs are interacting with. So there could be something that, like a nation state or an empire, like puts into practice, puts into law. But how is that going to affect your PCs? And that's very important, because you want that to be uh, first and foremost in their minds, is the fact that the bigger things that are happening is affecting them.
yeah,
Uh,
you also have the game. It is a different mindset because you have a game that's been, at this point, 27 years or whatever, and you expect it to continue on for, who knows how long, another 10 years, another 50 years. So you're telling this story, and if you have people who play this game like I have or like you have for 20 some odd years, they're going to have these memories. They're going to know what, like, they know the storylines, they know all of this information. Whereas in a D&D game, your players might know world information, but their characters are going to change every 20 levels.
yeah.
If they make it to the top end of the game, highest level character I've ever played up was 30, and we played that game for about 3 years. So after that 3 years, it's a new game, it's new play or new characters. So you don't have to have that consistency that you do in a LARP.
Well, and that's also something that is uh, very peculiar to especially southeastern buffer LARPs, is the idea that campaigns last for 20 years.
I know there's a lot of LARPs that are literally run a one-off event, or hell, you go to Europe and they have events. There'll be a campaign that runs 2 events out of the year.
Uh,
Just 2 giant events or one giant event, and that's it. And then you make new characters every time you show up.
Not just that, but you have certain games that have set the precedent of, we're going to run a 3-year story, and they'll run games like every month, every other month. They'll run 6 to 8 events a year, but they're saying that, hey, you get to play these characters, this set of characters for 3 years or maybe 4 years or 5 years. But after that, we're going to start over. It's still going to be the same campaign world, but we're going to start new. We're going to start fresh.
We're D&Ding you. You're getting new
Yeah,
characters after a few years.
And that's always been like the very interesting thing that the difference between like D&D and LARPing or Shadowmoor in this specific example. That like in D&D, I find people like can't wait to play a character to 5th level to make a new character the next time and just kind of go a little bit more outlandish. Whereas when you go to the Shadowmoor, you have people who are invested in their character and will not change that character, will only play that one their entire time there.
I know you can't see it, but I'm totally raising my hand right now.
And part of that is there's some like intrinsic things about that are that tie you into that sort of mindset. Number one is you're having to pay every time to go play that game, and so you have a monetary investment because you like your money and you're wanting to continue that story, and you want to get your money's worth. Also, dealing with money is the fact that many folks buy their own costuming or make their own costuming for that, with that particular character in mind. And so not only do you have to pay the cost of admission for the weekend, but you're also paying for your garb, any sort of weapons that you might carry, the latex or calamasil. We use our boffers. And that's not cheap.
They're expensive.
Yeah.
And so you're putting in monetary investment to that character. And so for some people, if you play that character for 4 or 5 years, then you might feel that you've gotten your money's worth out of that costuming or out of that garb. Of course, there are some of us who like just continue to buy more garb and just add it to that character's collection. And so it's very hard to give up playing a character that has become part of your life in more ways than one. Not just emotionally, but financially.
It's also a game design issue. So D&D, and more specifically with the newer editions of D&D, it just feels like it's so much easier to gain levels. So you'll go through 2 games. You start out first level, and by the end of your second game session, you're already 3rd level.
Yeah,
like it's very, very quick in Dungeons and Dragons to level up. In the LARP that we play in, by the point you've hit 5 years of playing, you're sort of starting to hit that point where you're actually able to do things. After you played for when you've played a decade, then you're a reasonably high level character.
Right. And hopefully that's one of the things that Casey and I and the staff that we've put up around us. One of the reasons we've changed some of the things that especially from when the game first started, that we have accelerated some of that, so you don't feel that sort of grind.
Mm-hmm.
That you actually feel like you're becoming more accomplished quicker, so that you can experience more of the game world. Like, you don't have to be like, oh, only 7th level characters can go in this, but all of you guys are 3rd level, so you'll have to wait over there. You have to wait 8 more months, especially since you only play 1 game a month. You have to wait 8 months before you even come close to that level in order to take part in this story content.
If you're one of the lucky ones who can play every every event. There's some people who get to play 2 times a year. So
yeah, and so making the story and the world available to them by making it so that mechanically you are at least a little bit more up to speed. We don't want to like.
You don't want first or second event people showing up and being ridiculous because the game
Right.
has a lot to learn. You don't want
There's
them being
a learning curve.
overwhelmed.
There's
Yeah.
definitely a learning curve there. At the same time, you don't want to disaffect your players who come and play every event for 10 years and have put so much time and effort into their characters to not be able to, you know, you don't want them to feel that, oh, this person showed up 2 times and they're just as capable as someone who's been here for 10 years and has played and put their time in.
Yeah, there are LARPs like that, and that's fine, but those aren't the style that we're talking about here.
Well, one thing I do find funny is that even if someone shows up and they are only like level 3 or 5, just coming into the game for the first time, if they're a good enough role player and they can get into character well enough and they have usually the costume to back it up, people automatically think that they are much stronger or higher
Yes.
level than they are.
Yeah, you can gain respect real quick like that in those games.
Yeah,
and yeah, it's part of like, and, you know, that's a very constant, very very real thing is the way you look, the way you act, the way you hold yourself, because it is a live action role playing game. It's not so much about, you know, um, Dirk Midnight sits in the corner of the tavern in the shadows and broods menacingly. That's not going to win you any friends, but getting out and playing with people and helping out and doing things that, because that's the other thing. It's a social game. You have to interact with other people in order to make things happen for you. And
so much of this it really does translate over to D&D to an extent. You know, everybody understands the social aspect of D&D. You're hanging out with 6 of your friends, but if your characters, you know, it is a good DM is going to have a living, breathing world as much as possible. So your characters need to get out there and experience that world. Just because the dungeon master has things planned for you ahead of time doesn't mean that you can't reach out to that DM and say, "This is what I'd like to do. This is what I would," even just tell them ahead of time. That way they have time to think about it and at least prepare for it as much as possible. But if your wizard wants to go off to do this grand adventure to find this component to create some new spell, that's what you should be doing.
I think that to me is the hardest thing for me personally to do. Like, just as an example, last night, talking with our friend Eric, who's DMing our Star Wars campaign, you know, I kind of wanted to go a certain direction with my force sensitive Zeltron and getting a lightsaber and getting a certain color crystal for her lightsaber, and like just coming out and like asking the DM, like saying, "Hey, I want to take the idea of how the Sith corrupt and make their red saber crystals, and I want to kind of do the persuade seduction side of it, and I want to apply that to the crystal, and I want to turn it pink or fuchsia." You know, even me coming out and telling him that was always weird to me as a player to a DM. But as a DM, I kind of really want the players to come to me and like, "Hey, I want to do this, I want to do that," and I can roll with that really easy. And it's so weird how like I have that problem as a player, but that's exactly what I want as a DM.
And that's one of the things you got to find, as any sort of game master storyteller, is balancing story versus sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Are you sacrificing the carefully crafted narrative that you've set up for the freedom of a sandbox, or are you just going on the whims of the table or the game, versus the story that you want to tell? And it's finding that balance. Finding that balance is very crucial.
Every DM has their preference too. I am heavily a sandbox DM. Like I'm going to write up the adventure for the week or whatever, but truthfully, my campaign does not have a beginning. It does not have an end. It's just going to keep flowing, and as long as the people want to keep playing, I'm going to keep running it. If they throw things at me, I'm going to just make stuff up, and we're going to have a good time doing it. The other guy that runs games that I play under, he is much more of a structured storyline DM. Like he has a beginning to the campaign, he has an ending to the campaign. Maybe all the in between on how to get there isn't there, but he'll sort of figure that out along the way. But he knows where it's going.
And both of those are equally valid ways to play.
Mm-hmm. So I enjoy both.
Right.
So when it comes to your game, which do you prefer your LARP to kind of exist in? Well, noting the fact that you've inherited 20 years of already established storylines.
LARP is a sandbox, whether you want it to be or not.
Yeah, I mean, you can impose some generic story, or not generic, but you can impose some story over there. But just by the sheer number of participants you have at a LARP, such as Shadowmoor, it's going to be, you have to deal with the sandbox.
Yeah, Chris unfortunately did not get to, because of the pandemic and all, he didn't get to witness all the times that players were going to screw up his storylines this year.
Or that you have to make up a new story based on, like, player comes down and it's like, hey, I need to go to this town and do a thing. Can y'all help me make that happen? And you didn't have, that's not part of any.
You don't even know whose story. Yeah, you have no idea whose storyline this even is.
Now at my table, I mean, I try to influence both of these. So in my Monster of the Week game, which is urban fantasy, we're currently trying to face down Apollyon. Apollyon is a demonic force from the Book of Revelation, and we're trying to stop Apollyon's rise to power and bring about the apocalypse. I introduced the bad guy. They've been in the town that it's set in. They had got to play around there a little bit, and then we had at least half of a session where all we did was like, okay, how do we want to deal with this? And I gave them a structure of, like, in order to banish Apollyon, you've got to do this. You're going to have to put together the stuff for this big ritual. There are going to be 7 components, arbitrary number, but 7's a great one. And I chose a few, and then I had the players choose the other ones. And so then I had a direction for the end game of the campaign. And that was and that's one of the things I do love about Monster of the Week, is it encourages collaboration. And so I know that some of the older friends that I have that are playing in that game, because this is a weird mixture. It's several of my newer friends who are LARP buddies, and then 3 of the 3 friends that I grew up with. So, like, friends from high school, and I'm in my late 40s, so that was 30 years ago. And we grew up playing 2nd edition, where collaboration was not a thing. The GM told a story, and you reacted to what the GM did to you. And so finding that balance between old friends and new friends, reaction versus collaboration, was very weird and very fun and very enlightening.
I find it a lot harder to run those collaborative games online than in person. In person, it's pretty easy to fully get into character, get all of the players invested, and sort of let them run wild with making the story along the way. But online, because it's Roll20, I have to have pre-planned the maps. I have all this other stuff that's already has to be laid out. Otherwise, it kills time trying to get all of this stuff imported into the game.
Well,
So,
that was the reason why we ended up having at least a half a session. I had something else planned for the rest of the session, but that half session we kept it kind of in play where the characters were collaborating on they were researching how they needed to banish Apollyon, and so as we came up with those things, we just added it to the in play ritual that they're getting the stuff and building the stuff to do. So that became a thing that they were doing in character, in play, but Kevin's taking notes, and so that it's something that I can plan for in the future. So it's kind of a both and, but at the same
what's
time,
this notes thing?
every time I start a game, I buy a journal.
Oh, so do I. So do I.
And
I'm just bad about writing. I'll write notes all over the damn place, so it's hard for me to keep up with things.
and then I've got a Google Doc open for my game, and it's about 40 pages long right now.
I just learned how to use Google Docs like a month ago.
Ooh, I love Google Docs.
Yeah, me too. I use it every damn day now.
Yeah. And so then I can modify that Google Doc, and I post part of it so the players can see, and they're responsible for to keep up with the notes of the stuff that's going on, and they can make one addition, one change, and everybody can see it. Everybody can reference it. I keep it as like a notification I start a Facebook page, like a Facebook group for every campaign that I run.
So do I.
And so they have access to that. I can post updates on the Facebook page. Kind of keeps everybody on the same track.
I'm trying to get my players. We've been doing the Facebook groups thing for years now, and I'm still trying to get my players used to digging in there for information. Like, I'll post maps in there and all this information, and it's been there for 6 months, and then players will still be asking me the same old stupid questions, even though it's been there the whole time.
Yep, that's yep.
Yeah, that's the clue by 4 that you occasionally have to beat them. Yep,
kicking and screaming. I know
See,
those feels.
What's really funny too is like I've been DMing since like start of 4th, and I guess most of my experience hasn't been running straight homebrew stuff. It's always been running something from a book or from a already established campaign setting, and I'm just kind of like doing my own story and letting it evolve as I want it to evolve. And I usually have a couple like tent pole ideas that I want them to hit, and eventually they'll get around to it, and kind of just let them figure out how to get there. I usually have my outlines and my ideas, but I've never been one to like write a bunch of notes and then put it up for everybody to kind of like review, because unfortunately as the player, like I've never reviewed the notes either. So I feel kind of bad. Like Eric, our Star Wars DM, he does that. He put up all the notes and like, here's the campaign notes, everything that happened. I'm like, all right, cool. But then again, I know exactly where my character is going. I understand what's going on in the grander scheme of the world, and I'm still taking part of everything. I just don't take good notes.
And that's I found this not only as a LARP runner, but as a storyteller tabletop as well. We are so much more invested as storytellers in what's going on than our players ever will be.
true.
Yeah,
We know all of our NPCs' names. We know their backstories, and we have that because they are our babies. We have created them. We have nurtured them. We have held their hands as they cross the street, and they're very important to us.
I will say though,
players don't care until they sit down at the table or show up on site.
I will say though, for when we did have our one event, I basically did buy a notebook just for the LARP, and I was, after every time I did a module, I wrote down just like the key notes, because I can't remember anybody's name, and so I had to like sit there and jot it down immediately, because we were responsible for keeping track of everything for the grander scheme of the game. And so I did take notes there with the outcomes, and that's probably the only time I've actually took notes for a game, because I really like that. At least at the table, I know my players. I kind of know where they're going to go. Usually, at the first 2 or 3 sessions, I know how their characters are going to be focused. You know, whether they're going to be like kind of like, hey, I just want combat all the time, or I just want to, live and breathe the world.
Yeah.
And I've been writing a homebrew, and I've been developing my own world and stuff like that since I, got published earlier this year. Like, this is like my next end goal for next year is to actually publish a homebrew. And I think there is going to be a very different experience for me, where like, since there is not a set campaign setting and there's nothing for me to draw from at all, I'm going to have to record all that data, and I'm going to have to then compile all that data and use the player's actions to drive the story further later on. And that's just
running a homebrew campaign, not super difficult because you can sort of build it as you go. Writing a homebrew campaign is a whole other animal, because at that point you have to have everything down.
Yeah, because publishing is so much different than running. And like, if I run my current Monster of the Week urban fantasy set in a fictional small town in Western Virginia in the mountains, named it Old Church. So Old Church, Virginia. Of course, it's kind of like my Stephen King, Bangor, Maine sort of feel, except in rural Virginia.
Except in Virginia.
Except in Virginia, because you write what you know.
True. I could do one about Atlanta pretty easily.
So like, my world building process is so different for running a campaign, because you do what I like to call a reverse vortex. You start at the center, you start very locally, and then you start building everything else around that. So like, I started with the concept of there's something weird going on in this small town, and it's a mining town because it's set in the 90s. It's a mining town. Well, what sort of stuff happens in a mining town? Well, you've got the old school, old family mining company that's been around forever, and then you've got the new international corporation mining company set up on the mountain next door, and they're competing for land rights and stuff like that. And so there builds some tension in the town itself.
You literally just described every Scooby-Doo episode ever.
Well, I mean, yeah, write what you know.
Yep.
And so you build that tension there, and you start to swirl outward rather than swirling inward with like a normal vortex. So you start local, and then you build upon that, and then you take everything else that you've built upon, and you add a little bit something to it. How does the economy work? Because now that there's competition between these two mining companies, there's actually a drive for more workers, so there's more people coming into the small town. Blah 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 blah, and then like, you just build outward from there. Especially since the players aren't going to see any of that work that you've already done. They
Go ahead. Go.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's you're going to put in 75 to 90% more work than the players are going to be interested or have time to do in a tabletop RPG.
My campaigns. Go ahead. Go, Chris.
I'll say that kind of sparked an idea while you're talking about this town in the middle of Virginia, where like, you don't really write the story, but you just tell the players that, hey, you're in a town in the middle of Virginia. You set the setting for them, and then you say something mysterious has happened in this town. And from your perspective, you haven't actually decided what that is. You just let the players kind of figure it out. let them come up with the idea of what mysterious thing is happening just by you sitting there role playing different characters until they click on to some kind of lead that's not a lead and they just run crazy with it.
And then they write your story for you.
Players are real good at writing stories for you. Trust me. I've done that to my other DM lots of times, where he'd have something planned. We'd just go off on some crazy ass tangent. And next thing you know, what we ended up doing was not what he'd planned, but it ended up becoming canon and part of his campaign world for the next 50 years forward. Yeah, like, geez, when it comes to campaign building, though, like I'm with you on the vortex, as you called it. I always start small. Hobtown, which is that's what I refer to my campaign as. Yeah, so I started with Hobtown, which is just one damn town in the setting. I ran campaign from there for several years, and at this point, I've got 13 different countries. Every one of them's completely different. They have their own problems and goings on. And players. I always tend to set the campaign in a single country or a single locale in a country. So there's a lot of them that the players have never been to yet, but I know behind the scenes what's going on in each of those locations. So if I ever decide, I can just run a campaign there overnight.
Yeah.
That's a great picture, though, that you posted there.
That's what confused me. I just heard the ding sound on Discord. I was like, what the fuck was that? Oh.
So this was one of the, like, I saw this picture like on just some RPG forum.
That's wonderful.
Somewhere, and I was like, that's exactly what I'm going for. And so I use that as the basis for just whatever's going on in this town, that they're mining and drilling down into the earth, and they don't really know what they're drilling into.
It's a mine. Yeah, no, they've drilled too deep and hit things they shouldn't have hit. I think we'll post this picture somewhere on Facebook and Twitter and all that fun stuff.
And of course, that's not mine. That's just the inspiration that I used to.
Yeah. If you can figure out where you got it from, let us know. If not, well, we'll give props to whoever's it is if we can.
I mean, my inspiration for my homebrew is based off an 80s board game. So
it's a true story.
I mean, we all get the inspiration from some weird place.
My inspiration was because I'm lazy.
Yeah. And one things I do love about running stuff online is, since I'm trying to do a very the format of a TV show, like I'm trying to run a supernatural TV show.
Yeah, that's literally what I thought of when you said it was supernatural. At least the first season of it.
Like, every time that I introduce an NPC, or even the PCs, the players, I had them choose actors to play their characters, and so they have 5 actors who are playing the roles of their characters in this TV show that we're telling together. And so every time I introduce an NPC, I just choose an actor.
Looks like Ed Harris.
It looks like Ed Harris or Jeffrey Dean Morgan, or anybody that I want to. And, like, one of the nice things that I will take, like, if I have to introduce a whole bunch of NPCs for a certain mystery that they're solving, I will just choose a random TV show, and all of those NPCs will be actors from that TV show. Like, I've done Community was one, the Flash TV show was another. Just because it's easy to find, actors, and so they're all kind of related, and so it kind of actually adds to the feel of what we're doing that night, and it's fun for me.
Yeah, so the campaign that we played up to 30th level, I played a sorcerer in there, and we actually did that as to what actor would play your character. And the actual description, when people would ask what my character looks like, is, you see Robert Downey Jr. in Iron Man. Like that's what he was. That's exactly what that character looked like.
That reminds me of something just happened recently to Allison Brie, where Marvel Studios put out a call for an Allison Brie type character to play She-Hulk.
You mean Allison Brie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, no one talked to me about this. Why can't I be that?
And from my understanding, she is She-Hulk. So good casting, I
Yeah.
thought. Yeah.
I think she got the part, but I think maybe they added it as just formalities at that point in time. But like, no one had come to her. But I don't know. I've created a few NPCs, and unfortunately, I think from my perspective, they've all been very generic. I think I have 2 or 3 good ones that I've used over and over again, just because they're easy for me to get into that character mindset, and they're just a different kind of like class that I normally like to play. So I kind of maybe overuse those too much, but beyond that, it's just like, okay, just what's in the book, and I just use those characters.
Yeah, perfect. I love Kenny Powers there on the top.
Oh yeah. So from 12 o'clock around, we have our local conspiracy theorist who works at the bowling alley, played by Danny McBride. Then you've got the uh, local boy who grew up, and he's now working as a maintenance man at the local college. That's Tom Welling, who his family ended up being like members of a secret society bent on protecting the innocence of the supernatural world. So good times. And then David Harbour is a professor at the local college, who is actually secretly blessed by the god Marduk and is tasked with destroying evil in all its forms. So essentially like a thunder god sort of deal.
Yeah, pulling out the old ancient Sumerian deities.
Yeah. Then we've got Sean Bean is playing Jack Churchill.
He's undead, right?
He is actually a wizard from who
I
was
just figured
alive
with it
during
being
World War
Sean Bean,
II.
with Sean Bean, he's already died a few times, I'm sure. So,
Well, I mean, this is Sean Bean from Sharp, so he can't die. You can't kill Sharp.
oh,
Can't
okay.
kill Richard Sharp. But so he's a wizard who's been alive, who fought in World War II, and the actual character Jack Churchill was a captain in World War II who was known for carrying like a saber into battle. And then Sean Penn is our local vampire who teaches at the local supernatural prep school nearby. And then in the middle is our bad guy Apollyon.
I love it.
That's probably a great idea. Just like you said, just grab those kind of groups of people and just here's your NPCs. Never actually thought about doing that.
Yeah, and
Good
you can make you easily make your own tokens for Roll20. So each of these pictures are their tokens as they move around, as the maps and stuff I throw up. Those are their tokens.
It's actually kind of funny because in my 5e game, I'm taking a break from DMing right now, and we have a very brand new DM. This is the first time he's ever DM'd, and he created his own like little kind of like tournament otherworldly thing that our characters have gotten thrust into, and his the deity that's kind of like ushering us through these challenges. It's just David Bowie, and that's the icon. It's just David Bowie. So
I keep telling you, you need to use the David Bowie from Venture Brothers.
The last time I played Monster of the Week, that's that Wednesday night group. We had someone playing the Archangel Michael, and their token or their inspiration was David Bowie. So the GM decided that any sort of celestial or demonic figure was a famous musician.
Perfect.
So
so who is Keith Richards?
Oh, I don't know all that. I do know that. So Michael, the Archangel Michael, was David Bowie. He ended up having a little helper, a little henchman, who was who's the kid from the Monkees?
Oh,
One of those. But
yeah.
then my character had made a deal with the demon Marchosius, from the Pseudomonarchia Daemonia. And so, of course, the GM decided he was going to use
Davy Jones. Davy Jones.
Davy Jones. Use Stevie Nicks as the representation of my demon Marchosius. So perfect. It was
I love it.
awesome.
No, because the one thing we talked about before we started was we were talking about music and how we use that for like inspiration and just helping us focus on world building. And we had brought up a topic, and then we decided to save it for the podcast. So now I'm bringing it back up so we can actually talk about it. But it was also like an hour and a half ago. We may have forgotten.
Did we have another topic? Because I sure as hell have forgotten it.
Well, I mean, we were talking about making playlists for.
Oh yes, inspiration. That's
right.
Yeah, man, my brain. If I don't write things down, I don't remember them. Yeah, because you were specifically talking about utilizing playlists for inspiration. I personally use artwork. If I'm planning on running a Star Wars game, or I've been looking at this Carbon 2185, and that's automatically inspiring me. So whenever I decide to run this as a campaign, I'm just going to go out and start Googling cyberpunk art and probably start listening to like techno music. I don't know what the kids call it these days, but but yeah, that's what I'll utilize to get myself inspired.
Well, I'm posting my old church playlist. So one thing is I just chose a bunch of like this. There's a new trend in like Southern Gothic and um, revitalization of that sort of sound, and so that's the.
Yep. I mean, naturally, I see the Johnny Cash on there. The Parker
Those Poor
Wilson.
Bastards is a good one. But all of it has very, supernatural feel to it. Another thing that I've done is, especially when I'm making a new character for a RPG, especially for a LARP, I will make their playlist. That helps get me in the mood. Of course, I didn't get to mention that as I'm running each of the different mysteries. That's what they call adventures in Monster of the Week, is a mystery. So like, yeah. But I've based each of those in some way off of the uh, Metallica Black album. So each song from there has been the title of a mystery that they have solved.
I get it. I'm drawing blanks on the names of them, but there was the one about being a werewolf. There was Through the Never. Like, I could absolutely see those sort of carrying over.
And each of them work kind of perfectly. So we started out with Inner Sandman, where they fought a nightmare demon. And then Sad But True, Holier Than Thou,
Yeah. I'm having to Google it too. Yeah, of Wolf and Man would be the werewolf.
Yeah. And so I've just used little hints of stuff like that would tie the mystery that they were solving into that album. And I got solid 6, 7 mysteries into it before anyone even started to think about that was a thing.
Just so like once per game session, you just say the words Inner Sandman in some sentence, then Sad But True the next game session. Just throw those words in there at some point.
Or yeah, and just general themes of the mystery itself. So you just tried to give little hints, and that was more of a present to me, uh, a nice way to mental exercise, if it were, to work those in there. That was fun.
So like the only time I've actually used a song playlist to help me create something is it was actually, and it is, I think it's probably the first time I've admitted it outside of my wife. I was writing a Fallout fan novel essentially, and it's very easy to find Fallout style music because you just Google Fallout style music or Fallout music on YouTube, and there's the playlist from all the Fallout games. But I had done that on, I think, Pandora or Spotify, and it was randomly going through and playing me different kind of like jazz songs from like the 1920s, early 1930s. And there was one that came up by an artist called Bessie Smith called "Send Me to the Electric Chair," and it was when that song played, like the main character and his backstory just immediately clicked. Like everything that was in that song like became that character story, and it solidified everything that how the entire book would go from that point on. And I just found it weird because that's the only time I've actually ever used a playlist like that, and it having such an impact on what I was creating.
Um, yeah, it's something very powerful. It's helps get those creative juices flowing and really keeps me in the mood. Like if ever I need to like hit a dead end or anything like that, it's something that I know I can go to that will help focus me back on what I want to do and where I want to go. Um, and that's typically one of the first things work at when I'm thinking about a new campaign or even a
Yeah,
new character is what songs, especially if I can get out of my headspace of like stuff that Kevin likes and think about like especially for a character, what would this character like? What kind of stuff? How is this character going to be different than Kevin? And how is it going to be the same? You know, because you always draw some of the things from yourself when you're making a new character. Um, but
ain't that
and
the
so
truth?
that that gives you cool stuff to draw upon, and it helps put me in the headspace of that character. And that's is especially helpful when I'm making a new LARP character for whatever reason, or if I'm playing a new LARP.
Yeah, because we've been stuck at home with the pandemic and all, we've played a lot of different one-shot games or two-shot games on Roll20. We did that for months before we finally actually decided to start running full campaigns. And so I've been through the gamut of characters, and after a while, I just started running out of ideas for it. Yeah, having it's really good advice trying to use music or something else. What would this character like? Even if the character is sort of generic on paper, it's the same old fireball wizard type thing. If you can think of it in context of what would they actually like musically, it might get you a completely different feel for the character and be able to get into them a lot quicker and easier.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it's good words of advice.
So I think that's pretty much about it at this point in time. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for the listening audience?
Oh, part. As far as a GM, storyteller is just always follow your ABCs. You know, always be creative, and that really involves surround yourself with things that are going to fuel whatever creative juices you have going. You know, read new books, um, watch new movies, watch new TV shows, listen to music, because you never know when you're going to find one nugget of an idea that you can turn into a great story for your tabletop or for your LARP or for just your character, even backstory stuff. You know, always be consuming creative works, because you never know when it's going to impact you and what you want to create.
Yep. I do the same constantly. I have to stay creative as a writer, and every day it's music that inspires me, or another TV show or something to keep me going.
Yeah, I think that's good words of advice to end us on. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Kevin.
Well,
And
thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
and hopefully we can see you next year.
Bye, Craig.
We'll see. Bye, Craig. Have a good one, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Don't let Trevor get you down.